Well, friends, let's press on. Somebody was asking me during the break a really practical question, which I'll address now. And the question was this: if you're preaching a series of sermons from Job, how do you conclude the sermons in the middle? So, for example, to take what we've just looked at, I preached, when I first did a series of sermons on Job, I think we did 7 sermons, and the third sermon was on the comforters. I just took all those comforters' speeches. So I think we had one of the speeches, or maybe 2 of them read, perhaps in a paraphrase, and I went through really their tone, their system, their gaps, all those kinds of things. So it was sort of expository, but it was trying to cover quite a lot of material. It's difficult to know quite how to do that. But the question I was asked was, how do you conclude that? How do you conclude a sermon on Job's comforters? It's a really practical question, because of course all of us who are involved in pastoral ministry know that although we would love everybody who was there this Sunday to be there next Sunday, in practice they're not. Maybe they are in your churches. Are they always there in Malaysian churches? If they're there one Sunday, they're always there the next. In British churches, they're certainly not. And therefore, we must remember, of course, we are ministers of the gospel of Christ. And we're always called to preach the gospel of Christ. And we must be ministers of grace and of Christ. How do we preach the gospel of Christ and of grace in Jesus Christ after a sermon on Job's comforters, without just tacking it on at the end and saying, well, that wasn't very cheerful, now I'll tell you the gospel of Christ? How do we do that? I tried in each of the sermons in the middle to avoid taking them straight to the end of the story. I think that's a mistake if every time we just go straight to chapter 42, because it destroys any kind of tension as the story goes through. And I think it's important not to do that. But I tried always to find some genuine link between the passages we were looking at and the gospel of Christ. For the comforters, I took that verse in chapter 4, is it verse 7, where Eliphaz says, who being innocent ever perish, chapter 4, verse 7. And because the last point that I was making was that the comforters had no place for an innocent man perishing, that seemed to me a perfectly valid line to the cross of Christ. So I said that the fact that they have no place for the suffering of an innocent man that turns out to be redemptive reminds us, and I think I was preaching, it happened to be a Lord's Supper when I was preaching it. It happened to be the Holy Communion service or the Lord's Supper. And so it was a very natural line to that actually in the Lord's Supper the gospel was being preached to us as we were remembering the death of an innocent man who had died on behalf of guilty people and whose death had a purpose, and yet he was innocent and he suffered. That seemed to be a natural thing. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. That was just at the end, because I wanted to teach people the theology of Job's comforters and why it was wrong. But I always tried to find something. So if you were here last night, when I did Job's lament in chapter 3, I tried to draw, probably not very well, but to draw a line from Job and his loneliness and his suffering and his darkness, and to see in Job a foreshadowing, a type of the Lord Jesus Christ and his loneliness in Gethsemane and the darkness of the cross and his suffering, and to see therefore his ability to walk with us through suffering. So I hope that those kinds of links I made at the end were natural and genuine links that arose out of the passages. I tell you what we're going to do now between now and lunch, God willing. We're going to focus on Job and his speeches. And what I want to do is to talk about them We'll maybe read one or two of them. But I want to try to model for you two possible ways of preaching Job's speeches. So these are Job's speeches from chapter 6 all the way through to 27, all the times Job is speaking there. So I want to talk about them a bit. We'll read one or two of them. And then I want to model for you, as I say, two different ways in which you might consider preaching it. One of them is more of a sort of overview kind of the speeches, rather as we did with the Comforters. And the other is to focus on a particular speech, chapter 19, which I'm also going to try to preach at this evening's meeting. So I hope that may help us as preachers and Bible teachers to think how we tackle this kind of material. Let's begin, though, by reading one of Job's speeches. Let me pray, and then we'll read one of Job's speeches. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this wonderful book, and we pray in this second part of our morning that you'd work in us by your Spirit to open our eyes, help us to understand your word aright. Please help me to be faithful and helpful and edifying as I seek to help us open it up for Jesus' sake. Amen. Let's take Job's speech in chapters 9 and 10. And what I'll do is I will read it through, but as I read it, I'll try to give us the force and the sense of the speech. So I'll do a bit of paraphrasing as well as we go through. There's nothing on the handout for this particular bit. Then Job replied. Incidentally, the word replied or answered in English translations is a literal translation of the Hebrew word, but it doesn't convey quite what we mean by replied. Replied means start speaking. There's not necessarily any great engagement with what's just been said. So the Comforters and Job, it's what we sometimes call a dialogue of the deaf. One of them speaks, and their speech sort of goes straight past the other one, and then the other one so-called replies, but just speaks what they would have said anyway, more or less. So there's no great engagement between Job and his Comforters. But here is Job's speech. Indeed, I know that this is true, and in a sense he is there acknowledging something of what the Comforters have said. But how can a mortal be righteous before God? And this is law court language. How can a mortal be vindicated, declared to be in the right in the law court before God? That's what Job longs for, is justification, in doctrinal terms, righteousness. Though one wished to dispute with him, with God, he couldn't answer him 1 time out of 1,000. There's really no point trying to come up against God in a law court, he says. After all, verse 4, his wisdom is profound. His power is vast. Who has resisted him and come out unscathed? It would be madness for me to come into court against God. I'd be bound to lose. Verse 5, he moves mountains. Without their knowing it, overturns them in his anger. He's awesomely powerful. He shakes the earth from its place, makes its pillars tremble. He's the one who can shake up the world. He speaks to the sun and it doesn't shine. He seals off the light of the stars. He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. He's the maker of the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the south. These are all constellations of stars. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. When he passes by, I cannot see him. When he goes by, I cannot perceive him. If he snatches away, who can stop him? Who can say to him, what are you doing? That's what Job wants to say, isn't it? What are you doing? Will you explain yourself? I don't understand. Why? Verse 13, God does not restrain his anger. Even the cohorts of Rahab, that may be a reference to Egypt, cowered at his feet. How then can I dispute with him? This is hopeless. How can I find words to argue with him? Though I were innocent, I couldn't answer him. I could only plead with my judge for mercy. He's much stronger than me, says Job. This isn't an even trial between equals. Even if I summoned him and he responded. Supposing I said, I served a court summons on God and said to God, God, you are required to appear in court to answer an accusation against Job. Even if I summoned him and he responded, I don't believe he'd give me a hearing. He wouldn't listen. He'd crush me with a storm, multiply my wounds for no reason. He's just much too strong for me. He wouldn't let me regain my breath. I'd be like a boxer who'd be out on the ropes and gasping for breath. He'd overwhelm me with misery. If it's a matter of strength, he is mighty. And if it's a matter of justice, who's going to summon him? Who's going to be the judge who is going to summon God into court? I wish there were one, but there isn't, said Job. Even if I were innocent, my mouth would condemn me. If I were blameless, it would pronounce me guilty. I'd be so frightened. I'd say I was wrong, even if I was right. Although I am blameless, verse 21, I have no concern for myself. It's not just me I'm worried about. I despise my own life. It's all the same. Who cares? Whatever. That's why I say, he destroys both the blameless and the wicked. That's an extraordinarily serious accusation, isn't it? If you made that accusation against, what's the highest court of justice in Malaysia? Is it Supreme Court or High Court or what's it called? Supreme Court? Federal Court. If you made an accusation against a federal court judge and you said of him, he destroys both the blameless and the wicked, if you could prove your case, he would have to resign, wouldn't he? Ought to. Ought to. I've obviously touched on something. But it's a serious accusation to make against God, isn't it? Job is saying he's an unjust judge. He destroys the blameless and the wicked. It's a terrible thing to say. And it's worse, verse 23, when a scourge, a disease or something, brings sudden death, he mocks the despair of the innocent. That seems to me, says Job, the sort of God he is. When a land falls into the hands of the wicked, he blindfolds its judges. He blindfolds the judges. He makes the judges so they don't see and do justice. So he says, if you live in a land where the judges don't do justice, if you live in a nation where there's corruption, God does it, doesn't he? It's God who makes the judges corrupt. See at the end of verse 24, if it isn't he, then who is it? You see, he's in charge. That's the sense. So he says you live in a country that's corrupt. Somebody lives in a country that's corrupt somewhere, where justice isn't done. One of our students was related to a man, there was a very, very famous case in Britain called the Guildford Four, who were sent to prison for many years for a supposed terrorist crime for the IRA, but they were innocent. Says you live in a country where that kind of thing happens, justice is perverted. God does it, he's in charge. And he says, verse 24, if it isn't him, who is it then? See, you see the force of his question. He's in charge if he's sovereign. So who does it? And then 25, my days are swifter than a runner. My life is just going past so fast. They fly away without a glimpse of joy. They skim past like boats of papyrus. You make a little paper boat on a fast-running stream and it just skims past. Or like eagles swooping down on their prey. See an eagle going down on its prey so fast. That's what my life feels like. Just going through so fast. Incidentally, dwell on the poetry. Get people to feel the poetry of it. It is wonderful, wonderful poetry. If I say, verse 27, I will forget my complaint. I will change my expression and smile. Oh, all right, I'll pull myself together and cheer up. I still dread all my sufferings, for I know you will not hold me innocent. Since I am already found guilty, why should I struggle in vain? I know I'm going to lose my court case with God, he says. I'm bound to lose. Even if I'm innocent, I'm going to lose. Because he's much stronger than me. He's decided to make me guilty, so I'm going to be guilty. Even if I washed myself with soap, my hands with washing soda, you would plunge me into a slime pit so that even my clothes would detest me. There's no way I can be clean in your sight. He's not a man like me that I might answer him. If he was another mortal, I could stand against him. I might hope to win, but he's not, that we might confront each other in court. 33. If only there was someone to arbitrate between us. If only there was someone who would be a mediator. If only there was someone who would stand between me and this terrible God to lay his hand upon us both. Someone to remove God's rod from me so that his terror would frighten me no more. Then I would speak up without fear of him. But as it now stands with me, I cannot. I loathe my very life. Therefore I will give free rein to my complaint. I'm not going to stop. You're not going to shut me up. I'm going to speak out in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me, but tell me what charges you have against me. You see, he's been imprisoned without trial. That's the point, isn't it? He says, God has put me in prison without trial. See, the British government has just abandoned plans to imprison people for 40 days without trial. It's a terrible thing. Terrible thing, isn't it, when a government does that? So glad they've abandoned it. Most British people wanted them to do that. It's very illiberal. Job says, I've been put in prison without trial. And I keep asking the jailers, could you tell me what I'm here for? What have I done wrong that I'm here? Verse 3, does it please you to oppress me? You enjoying it? To spurn the work of your hands? You made me, while you smile on the schemes of the wicked. So Job says, you put me in prison, you've made my life miserable, but there are plenty of wicked people out there on whom you're smiling. They're prosperous. They're having a very happy time. Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see as a mortal sees? Are your days like those of a mortal, or your years like those of a man? That you must search out my faults and probe after my sin, though you know that I'm not guilty, and that no one can rescue me from your hand. Your hands shaped me and made me. Will you now turn and destroy me? So he's using an argument. He's saying to God, God, you've made me, you've shaped me. Isn't it rather perverse if, having shaped me, you just destroy me? Remember that you moulded me like clay. Will you now turn me to dust again? And then wonderful poetry, verse 10. Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? Didn't you make me like milk that gradually took solid shape? Wonderful picture, isn't it, of conception, of gestation in the womb, of this sort of nothingness that gradually took shape. Clothe me with skin and flesh, verse 11. Knit me together with bones and sinews. You've done all that. You gave me life, verse 12. Showed me kindness, and in your providence watched over my spirit. But this is what you concealed in your heart. And I know this was what was in your mind. So he says to God, all this time you looked as if you were being kind to me when I was conceived and just growing in the womb and then born. Actually, this is what you were planning for me. Verse 14, if I sinned, you would be watching me and would not let my offence go unpunished. In other words, all that time, the only reason you made me, says Job, was that you could pick on me. like a playground bully. You'd be watching me. You wouldn't let my offence go unpunished. And you were watching. Every time I put a foot out of line, you'd say, oh, look, he's put a foot out of line. Punish him. That's what you did. That's the only reason you made me, he says. Verse 15, if I am guilty, woe to me. Even if I'm innocent, I can't lift my head, for I'm full of shame. See, this is an innocent man who can't get justice, drowned in my affliction. 16, if I hold my head high, you stalk me like a lion, and again display your awesome power against me. You bring new witnesses against me, and increase your anger towards me. Your forces come against me, wave upon wave. You feel this for Job, don't you? I know this doesn't fit with our systematic theologies. It doesn't fit with our systematic theologies for a believer to say this kind of thing to God, but he says it. That's what this means. So verse 18, why then did you bring me out of the womb? It's very like chapter 3, his lament. Why? Why did you bring me out of the womb? I wish I had died before any eye saw me. I wish I had died as a miscarriage. If only I'd never come into being, or been carried straight from the womb to the grave. Are not my few days almost over? Turn away from me, so that I can have a moment's joy. It's a terrible thing to say to God, isn't it? Look away from me so I can have some joy. Because the moment you look at me, you pick on me. Before I go to the place of no return, to the land of gloom and deep shadow, to the land of deepest night, of deep shadow and disorder, where even the light is like darkness. So that was just to give us a feel for one of Job's speeches. You can do that yourselves with the other ones. But we need to do that. Now, let me model for you two ways in which we might tackle these speeches of Job's. First of all, these are two that examples of actually I did do these two. First of all, I did a wide-ranging sermon on Job. This is page 6 of the handout. And I asked the question at the beginning, is Job a real believer? That is to say, I picked up the Satan's question. The Satan's question in chapters 1 and 2. God says he's a real believer. He fears God, turns from evil, he's blameless, upright, he's genuine. And Satan says, no, he's not genuine, he's just pretending. He's got the form of godliness, but not the power. There's no reality there, he's not a real believer. So I started off with that question. I started with a little illustration, which probably would work just as well in Malaysia. I think this is a culturally transferable illustration. One of my sons and I, we parked our little car, and just in front of us there was a fantastic sports car. If I say it was a Ferrari 355, would that mean anything to you? Does Ferrari get to Malaysia? Are there wicked people who drive Ferraris? Anybody here who drives a Ferrari? It was an awesome car. It was the kind of car which looked as if it had an engine at both ends. And so we waited to see who would get out. Because we thought with a car like that, the person who gets out is bound to be some kind of Olympian athlete. You know, some Bond-like figure or something like that. And it was really disappointing because this sort of fat, balding, middle-aged scruff of a man got out and waddled off. And it was really disappointing. And I thought it was just a little parable that what you see on the outside doesn't necessarily correspond to what you have on the inside. And I thought it was a little parable. It's a parable. I mean, you could have a funny little battered old car, and you could have a 6'8" Olympic athlete get out of it. But this was the opposite. So I used that as a light-hearted way into the sermon to say, what you see on the outside in church may or may not correspond with what's inside. What you see on the outside in church, somebody who maybe is a very respectable member of a church, maybe the pastor, maybe in the pastoral leadership of a church. On the outside, like a Ferrari 355. On the outside, you think, terrific example of real Christianity. But what's on the inside may or may not correspond to what's on the outside. And so the Satan's question is this: is Job a real believer? What's on the inside? And the only thing that's going to reveal what's in the inside is suffering. Because the Satan says, doesn't he? And he says it today. Do you remember in Luke chapter 22, Jesus says to Simon Peter, Satan has demanded to sift you plural, you disciples. He's demanded to sift you like wheat. And we expect Jesus to say, but I've told him he can't. And Jesus says, but I've prayed for you. You, Peter, Simon Peter, that your faith won't fail. And the implication is that Satan's prayer to sift them like wheat has been granted. That when Satan says, I want to sift those disciples like wheat to see if they're genuine, the implication is God says, yes, you may. In other words, what happened to Job is not unique to Job or to Jesus. And therefore what's happening in the world today, and this is good for when we're preaching it, is that the Satan is, as it were, looking down from the heavenly courtroom. And he's saying, look at that man, look at that woman. They look like a real believer. But, Your Majesty, I don't think they are. Take away from them some precious relationship. Take away from them their success in their career. Take away from them their financial security. Take away from them their health. And then we will see if that's a real believer or not. And God says, yes, do it. That's the shocking thing, isn't it? God says, yes, do it. Now, the sermon that I preached on this was the fruit of many hours of reading and thinking and mulling all this over. But it seemed to me, and I offer this to you for you to think about, it seemed to me that there's something very paradoxical in Job's speeches. That Job says some terrible things. He says some things which are wrong. He says some things about God which are clearly wrong. You'd have to put a cross against them in the margin. And yet at the end of the book, God says that Job has spoken rightly about him. So I struggled with that, and I thought, what's going on here? How is it that these comforters, who seem so orthodox, are told that they've spoken wrongly about God, and Job, who seems so unorthodox, is affirmed as a real believer? And it seemed to me, as I looked at his speeches and thought about it, that there were at least two marks of a real believer. And these are the two that I've identified on the handout. And I want us to look at some speeches which identify these marks of a real believer, surprising marks, as I called them, of a real believer, marks that we might not have expected to be marks of a real believer. Let's take chapter 9, verse 21. We read it just now. Let me read you those 4 verses again. And then I'll pause and maybe give you just a couple of minutes to talk to the person next to you about what's at the root of Job's deepest distress. 9:21. Although I am blameless, I have no concern for myself. I despise my own life. It's all the same. That's why I say he destroys both the blameless and the wicked. When a scourge brings sudden death, he mocks the despair of the innocent. When a land falls into the hands of the wicked, he blindfolds its judges. If it isn't he, then who is it? Just a couple of minutes to think and maybe talk to the person next to you about what's at the root of Job's deepest distress here. I'll stop for a couple of minutes. Well, can I interrupt you there? How are you getting on? The interesting thing is that what causes Job the deepest pain is not his bankruptcy, and his bereavement and his sickness. Of course that causes him deep grief and pain, but it's not the deepest, is it? The deepest pain that Job experiences is that it seems to him that the God he thought was good isn't good. Isn't that it? He believes that there's a God in charge of the world, and he had thought that the God in charge of the world was a good God. And it seems to him that the God in charge of the world isn't a good God. And that's the deepest, almost the deepest pain anybody can ever experience, isn't it? You could feel the pain when he says, if it isn't him, who is it? And it's the sense of, I can't see how it can be him, but I can't see how it can be anybody else. There's nobody higher than God whose fault it could be, so it must be his fault, presumably. So that's at the root of it, isn't it? And we see this again and again in his speeches, that he has this strong sense that these things are done to him by God. Let me look at one or two others. Let's look at chapter 6, one of his speeches in chapter 6. Chapter 6, verse 2. If only my anguish could be weighed and all my misery placed on the scales, it would surely outweigh the sand of the seas. No wonder my words have been impetuous. Because, verse 4, the arrows of the Almighty are in me. God is like an archer firing arrows at me, and I am his target. And they're poisoned arrows, verse 4. My spirit drinks in their poison. God's terrors are marshalled against me. So it's not just the pain of what has happened, it's the fact that God has done it, and he doesn't deserve it, and he knows he doesn't deserve it. He knows he hasn't done anything to deserve what he's suffering. That's the pain, that's the misery of it. Sorry, I'm just looking for a reference, but I'll find it later. Again, chapter 7. See if this reminds you of anything. Chapter 7, verse 17. This is the end of another of Job's speeches. What is man that you make so much of him, that you give him so much attention? Does that remind you of anything? What is man? What is man? Psalm 8? Does that remind you of Psalm 8? What is man? How does Psalm 8 go on? What is man? What a wonderful thing man is. What a wonderful thing it is to be a human being, to be put in charge of the world. That's Psalm 8. But see how that same sort of language is used here. What is man? That you make so much of him, that you give him so much attention. But it's not positive, is it? That you examine him every morning and test him every moment. It's like my daughter's school. It's true. To test them every moment. It's a nasty girls' school. Will you never look away from me or let me alone even for an instant? If I have sinned, what have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why are you so bothered? Why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you? Why don't you pardon my offences and forgive my sins? And the implication is that Job has confessed them, isn't it? He's confessed them. He's not sinless, but he's penitent. for I shall soon lie down in the dust. You will search for me, but I shall be no more. You've made me, you'll look for me, but I'll be gone by then, and then you'll be sorry. That's the sense really there. And then look at chapter 16. I think I might read all of chapter 16 so we get the feel of this. Would that be all right? Are you happy if we do this? Should we sort of get into some of these speeches? Is that okay? Or do you think I'm wasting your time? You happy? One or two friendly people nodding, so that's good. Let's go for it. Job 16, Job replied, I've heard many things like these. Miserable comforters are you all. Will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you that you keep on arguing? I also could speak like you, if I were in my place. In other words, I'm quite capable of doing that kind of talk. I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you. Don't think you're the only ones who can play this game. But my mouth would encourage you. Comfort from my lips would bring you relief. Yet if I speak, my pain is not relieved. Job says, making my speeches, my laments, it doesn't seem to help. And if I refrain, it doesn't go away. It doesn't help whether I speak or I don't speak. My pain is unrelenting. Verse 7, surely, O God, you have worn me out. You have devastated my entire household. You have bound me. That is, you've tied me up. And it has become a witness. That is to say, my sufferings are evidence, a witness. They are evidence of my sin. That's what the comforters think. It's become a witness. They see me like this and they assume I'm a sinner. My gauntness, my thinness rises up and testifies against me. And every time anybody looks at me, they look at him and they say, look at him, he's so thin, he must be a sinner. Verse 9, God assails me and tears me in his anger and gnashes his teeth at me. My opponent, and my opponent is God, fastens on me his piercing eyes. See, this is his experience of God. This was the God he loved and trusted. And this God is just looking at him and picking on him and firing arrows at him and tearing at him. Verse 10, men open their mouths to jeer at me. They strike my cheek in scorn. It's not difficult to see how Job foreshadows the Lord Jesus, is it? They strike my cheek in scorn and unite together against me. God has turned me over to evil men and thrown me into the clutches of the wicked. God has done it. All was well with me, verse 12, but he shattered me. He seized me by the neck and crushed me. He has made me his target. His archers surround me. Without pity he pierces my kidneys and spills my gall on the ground. Again and again he bursts upon me. He rushes at me like a warrior. But he does it, and that's what's so painful. This is the God I loved and trusted. And he, who rules the universe, he is doing this to me. I've sewed sackcloth over my skin, buried my brow in the dust. My face is red with weeping. Deep shadows ring my eyes. And yet my hands have been free of violence, and my prayer is pure. And then the appeal, verse 18, O earth, do not cover my blood. You remember Cain and Abel? And the blood of Abel in Genesis 4 cries out from the ground. So it's Bible imagery, isn't it? So long as the blood of Abel lies on the ground, as it were, it cries out for justice to the judge. O earth, do not cover my blood. Because when my blood is covered, it means justice isn't going to be done. It's a secret thing. It's not going to be avenged. May my cry, that is my cry for justice, never be laid to rest. He says, may my cry for justice echo around the universe. until justice is done. Even 19, even now my witness is in heaven, my advocate is on high, my intercessor is my friend. And there's just a little glimpse here that Job begins to sense that there might be an intercessor, an advocate, a mediator. He's not sure quite who it is, but there's some sense that there is someone in heaven who's going to speak for him. As my eyes pour out tears to God, on behalf of a man he pleads with God as a man pleads for his friend. We'll see that more strongly in chapter 19. Only a few years will pass before I go on the journey of no return. My spirit is broken. My days are cut short. Notice, incidentally, how realistic is the psychology of Job's laments. That one moment he'll be saying, my intercessor is my friend, my witness is in heaven, pleading with God. That's all I can see. Verse 3, give me, O God, the pledge you demand. Who else will put up security for me? In other words, stand bail for me to let me out of prison. You have closed their minds to understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph. That is, the enemies. If a man denounces his friends for reward, the eyes of his children will fail. You are the God of justice. God has made me a byword, that is a mockery for everyone, a man in whose face people spit. What suffering! My eyes have grown dim with grief. My whole frame is but a shadow. Upright men are appalled at this. The innocent are aroused against the ungodly. Nevertheless, the righteous will hold to their ways, and those with clean hands will grow stronger. Do you see how he oscillates between despair and faith? Just goes to and fro. It's a bit like some of the Psalms, isn't it? But come on, all of you, try again, verse 10. I won't find a wise man among you. My days have passed, my plans are shattered, and so are the desires of my heart. These men turn night into day. In the face of darkness they say light is near. But it's just a mockery. If the only home I hope for is the grave, if I spread out my bed in darkness, if I say to corruption, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother or my sister, where then is my hope? It's the only family I've got, is rotting corpses in the grave. Who can see any hope for me? Will my hope go down to the gates of death? Will we descend together into the dust? Not at all. Now, my first teaching point really on this general sermon on Job's laments is that the problem of pain, as we sometimes call it, is the problem of the believer and not the unbeliever. This is the opposite of what the world thinks. You see, the objector to Christianity says, I can't believe in the God of the Bible because of all the suffering in the world. To which the answer is, why does the suffering in the world trouble you? We ought to ask that, when an unbeliever says that to us. Why does it trouble you? Because it does trouble them, but it ought not to trouble them if they're going to be consistent with their system. Why does it trouble them? Well, they say it shouldn't be like that. You say, well, why shouldn't it be like that? Well, it just shouldn't. Well, that's not very good. The problem of pain ought not to be a problem for the unbeliever. The problem of pain is precisely a problem for the believer. Because the believer believes and trusts that there is a good God running the world. That's why pain is a problem. And it's a problem particularly and uniquely for the believer. And it's one of the marks of a believer that a believer is troubled by the problem of pain. I've got to speak, I think, next Tuesday in Singapore to an evangelistic meeting of a Christian union in, I think it's Singapore Management University. And one of the things I'm going to say to the students is, if there are non-Christian students there, I hope there will be, I'm going to say, I assume that you feel your own pain, you don't like suffering, and I assume that you feel the pain of other people in their suffering, and I'm sure they'll nod. I mean, everybody feels the pain of other people to some extent in their suffering, feels the pain of the world. I assume you believe that it ought not to be like that there's something wrong about that. And I assume that you hope that one day things will get better. And if they agree to all four of those things, and most non-Christians would agree to all four of those things, wouldn't they? They agree that they feel their own pain, they feel other people's pain, they don't think it ought to be like that, and they hope that one day it'll be better. I shall say to them, that is precisely what the Bible writers feel and think. Precisely what the Bible writers feel and think, isn't it? See, Job, he feels his own pain, he feels the pain of other people, he's convinced it ought not to be like this, and he hopes desperately that one day it won't be. So the believer experiences a unique pain. Job's comforters don't feel that pain. There's no sign that Job's comforters are troubled about it at all. The only thing Job's comforters are troubled about is Job. They're cross about his speeches, but they don't feel the pain of the world, because for them it's very simple. Somebody suffers, they must have sinned. It all works perfectly in their nice tidy system. So the pain, the problem of pain, is a mark of a believer. It's a paradoxical mark, isn't it? That the believer is someone who experiences the pain of the world and is convinced it ought not to be like that, and yearns and longs for the day when it won't be, which leads into the second mark, which is a passionate longing. Let's have a look at chapter 23. Here's something which is so different from Job's comforters. I'll read verses 2 to 10, and as I read, ask yourself, what do they tell us about Job's longings? What is Job longing for? Even today my complaint is bitter, his hand is heavy in spite of my groaning. If only I knew where to find him. If only I could go to his dwelling, I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would find out what he would answer me and consider what he would say. Would he oppose me with great power, as in chapter 9? No, he would not press charges against me. There an upright man could present his case before him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. But if I go to the east, he's not there. If I go to the west, I don't find him. When he's at work in the north, I don't see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. Just think for a moment, what do we learn about Job's longings? What is Job most deeply longing for in that passage? When he says, if only I would. This is what I'm hoping will happen. This is what I'm longing for. What is he longing for most deeply? Very striking, isn't it? See, the unbeliever, if you ask the unbeliever who's suffering, what are they longing for? They'd say, well, I'm longing for the pain to go away. If you ask an unbeliever who's suffering from cancer, what are you longing for? Well, I'm hoping that the chemotherapy will be successful. I mean, that's the natural thing to long, isn't it? We all want that. Nothing wrong with wanting that, but we all want that. That doesn't mark someone out as a believer. But you ask Job, what are you longing for? And he says, I'm longing that I knew where I could find him. I'm longing to meet with him. I'm longing to be able to stand before him in court justified, vindicated, in right relationship with him. That's what I'm longing for. In doctrinal terms, he is longing for justification by grace through faith. He doesn't put it in quite those words, but that's what he's longing for. He's longing to stand and be seen to be in right relationship with the God he loves. So that longing is a remarkable mark of a believer. We just trace it quickly through some of the other verses here. Let's just tie this in with Job, with Satan's words. Chapter 1, verse 11. Stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Now, Job is longing to stand face to face with the Lord, but not to curse him. He's longing to stand face to face in right relationship with him. Again, the same thing in chapter 2, verse 5. Chapter 5, verse 1, Eliphaz says to him, "Call if you will, but who will answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn?" You think you're going to get access to the heavenly cabinet room? No way. Call, but who will answer you? We saw it in chapter 9, verse 3 onwards, where Job longs to be able to stand before God, but believes that he can't. We saw it in chapter 9, verse 32, 33, 34, 35. If only there was an arbitrator, if only there was a mediator between us. Chapter 14, verse 13. Chapter 14, verse 13, "If only you would hide me in the grave and conceal me till your anger has passed. If only you'd set a time and then remember me. If a man dies, will he live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait for my renewal to come. You will call and I will answer you." That's what he's longing for, isn't he? He's longing that God will call Job, "Come into my presence, and then I'll answer. You will long for the creature your hands have made. Surely then you'll count my steps, but not keep track of my sin. My offences will be sealed up in a bag, you'll cover over my sin." He's longing to stand right with God, isn't he? That's his deep, deep longing. It's a mark of the believer that he longs for that. So when I preached this sermon, I challenged us as a church about whether we've got these marks of a real believer. Whether we're just a church of nominal believers like Job's comforters, or whether we're a church of real believers who've got this, who feel the pain of a broken world and long deeply and passionately for God himself, and therefore who pray like the widow in Luke 18. It's a challenge, isn't it? The church that consists of real believers, the prayer meetings will be full. They'll be there for the prayer meeting. Job's comforters won't be there at the prayer meeting. No point to Job's comforters being there for the prayer meeting, because their respectable outward religion doesn't have prayer as a part of it. But Job has prayer as a part of his life, this longing, this desperate if only, and so on. So that's just the outline of how you could preach it as a sort of overall one. The practical difficulty with that is that when you do that kind of Bible teaching or sermon, we are necessarily dotting around a bit, which makes it harder for people to follow. That's the difficulty with that. And so although I did do that once, my preference is for something which focuses in on one particular speech of Job. So let me talk us through chapter 19 just briefly. And I'm only going to do this in outline. I'm going to try and preach it properly this evening, at this evening's meeting, but I'll just talk us through the outline and then we can have a bit of time for discussion and questions. Let me read Job 19 first. We're on page 7 of the handout. Job 19. How long will you torment me and crush me with words? 10 times now you've reproached me, shamelessly you attack me. He's speaking to his friends. If it's true that I've gone astray, my error remains my concern alone. It's not your business. If indeed you would exalt yourselves above me and use my humiliation against me, then understand that God has wronged me and drawn his net around me. Though I cry, I've been wronged, I get no response. Though I call for help, there is no justice. He has blocked my way so that I cannot pass. He has shrouded my paths in darkness. He has stripped me of my honour and removed the crown from my head. He tears me down on every side till I'm gone. He uproots my hope like a tree. His anger burns against me. He counts me among his enemies. His troops advance in force. They build a siege ramp against me and encamp around my tent. He has alienated my brothers from me. My acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My kinsmen have gone away. My friends have forgotten me. My guests and my maidservants count me a stranger. They look upon me as an alien. I summon my servant, but he doesn't answer, though I beg him with my own mouth. My breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own brothers. Even the little boys scorn me. When I appear, they ridicule me. All my intimate friends detest me. Those I love have turned against me. I am nothing but skin and bones. I have escaped by only the skin of my teeth. Have pity on me, my friends. Have pity. For the hand of God has struck me. Why do you pursue me as God does? Will you never get enough of my flesh? Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead, or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. If you say how we will hound him, since the root of the trouble lies in him, you should fear the sword yourselves. For wrath will bring punishment by the sword, and then you will know that there is a judgment. It's a wonderful speech, possibly Job's greatest speech. I led into it with the question, is God for me or against me? Because that seems to be the question that runs through this chapter. Is God for me or against me? There's no deeper question in the world in a way than that. And it's the question that lies behind the question, why? Why did she die? Why did he get Alzheimer's disease? Why did I get into this terrible job? Why was my childhood so difficult? Why was my son born handicapped? Why? And the question that lies behind it is the question, is God for me or against me? And this is the question that Job is grappling with in chapter 19. And chapter 19 begins with a rebuke to his friends in the first few verses, verses 1 to 6, where he rebukes his friends, how long will you torment me, reproach me, and so on. But the bulk of the chapter is the accusation that God is a monster, what the British writer C.S. Lewis called the cosmic sadist. That's what Job calls him in verses 6 to 22. And as I say, I'm not going to try to preach it to us now, but I want us to feel the force of it. He's attacked me unfairly. Verse 6, God has wronged me. He's an innocent victim, verse 7. He cries out, I've been wronged, but nobody helps. Verse 8, his way's been blocked, his path has been shrouded in darkness. Verse 9, he's been stripped of his honour, his dignity, the crown from his head, as it were, his ability to stand upright as a human being. Verse 10, he's been torn down, he's been uprooted. Verse 11, God is angry. Verse 12, God's troops advance in force and build a siege ramp against him and encamp around his tent. Incidentally, Job is full of imagery. You know, the tent is a familiar Bible image for mortal life. The tent, something that stands up but is so fragile, so easily blown over. But the image is almost funny, with a sort of black humour. It's like Job says, I went camping, just me in my little one-man tent. And I woke up and there seemed to be a lot of noise outside, and I peeped out of my tent and I saw the entire United States Air Force attacking me. That's the sense of verse 12. It's a sort of black humour, isn't it? It's just me in my little tent and all his troops coming up and laying siege ramps. And it's as if Job is saying, hey, this is overkill. Just me in my little tent. God is a monster, a cosmic sadist who's attacked him. And verses 13 to 20 move on from there to the isolation that God has given him. He's alienated, verse 13, my brothers from me, his acquaintances. Job had a long Christmas card list. I imagine Job would have printed his own Christmas cards. I imagine they would have been rather smart, don't you? Rather big, printed on quite heavy paper. He was a wealthy man, and people were very glad to get Christmas cards from Job. But now, nobody bothers to send him any Christmas cards now. He might as well be dead. They've gone away. His friends have forgotten him. They were friends when Job could give them money, but not now. And even in his house, you see verse 15, my guests, my maidservants, count me a stranger. Before, he was the big master. They say, who's he? Verse 16, it's so tragic, isn't it? This great man, I summon my servant. I say, servant, come here. Just pays no attention at all. Please come here. Please come here. Job gets down on his knees, and the servant doesn't pay any attention. He's repulsive to his wife, verse 17. And when he goes outside, verse 18, the school children coming back from school, he's just a figure of fun. Oh look, it was one of those sort of games on the way back from school to throw rotten fruit at Job. It's miserable, isn't it? This isolation. Even his intimate friends, verse 19, detest him and have turned against him, and there's nothing left. But it's God who's done it. That's the point, isn't it? This is a monstrous God who's done this. Now let's just pause for a moment. Let me go back to verse, where has it gone? Verse 21. Sorry, we don't go back, we go on. Have pity on me, my friends, have pity. For the hand of God has struck me. The hand of God has struck me. Can I just pause there a moment? Think back, if you will, to chapter 1 and chapter 2. Have a look back at chapter 1 and chapter 2. I'll pause for a moment. Just have a look back at chapter 1 and chapter 2. And look carefully at the language of hand. Job says the hand of God has struck me. Look back carefully at the language of hands. chapter 1, verse 11, Satan says to the Lord, "Stretch out your hand and strike everything he has." Verse 12, the Lord says to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your hands." And then chapter 2, verse 5, Satan says to the Lord, "Stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones." Verse 6, the Lord says to Satan, "Very well then, he is in your hands." So if we ask the question, whose hands have struck him, what's the answer according to chapters 1 and 2? In the language of hands used there, the answer is it's Satan's hands that have struck him, isn't it? With the permission of the Lord, but there is an indirectness about it. It's not that the Lord has actually struck him with his own hands directly. Satan's hands have been the hands that have struck him. Now I want to pause on this just for a moment to have a slight detour. One of the great tensions the Bible struggles with, as we know, is to do with agency, when something happens. There are basically two. I'm going to give you a striking example of this in a minute. If we ask, when something happens in the world, who did it? There are different answers to the question, who did it, aren't there? There's a human agent who did it, and at the top, of course, there's God who did it. But there's also an intermediate spiritual answer sometimes, that Satan did it. And of course we're familiar with this, aren't we? There's plenty of conversations in church, something's happened. Is this Satan's doing, or is it God's doing? Let me give you a slight detour. Turn up 2 Samuel 24 verse 1. Keep a finger in Job, but 2 Samuel 24 verse 1. I want us to, some of you will be familiar with this, I'm sure. 2 Samuel 24 verse 1. Just on this question of agency. During the reign of King David, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he, that is the Lord, incited David against Israel, saying, "Go and take a census." And you may remember being puzzled that why the Lord incites David to do something bad and then punishes them for doing something bad. Do you remember that? Perplexity, isn't it? And that's because the writer of Samuel and Kings, 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings, their kind of default position is if something happens, God did it. That would be their normal way of describing it. Now look at the parallel passage in 1 Chronicles 21 verse 1. 1 Chronicles 21 verse 1, where the chronicler, writing much later, but retelling or re-preaching the same history, describes the same event differently. 1 Chronicles 21 verse 1, Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. I wonder if you've noticed those two. Because the liberal scholars would immediately say, the Bible contradicts itself, which shows how shallow their thinking is. Did the Lord incite David to do it, or did Satan incite David to do it? Answer, yes. They're both true. They're both true. Ultimately, the Lord did it. If something happens, the Lord did it. That's the way Samuel and Kings tends to describe things. Did Satan do it? Yes. Satan did it. That's what we see in Job. Has God caused Job suffering? Yes. But it's by the hand of Satan that it's been done, and therefore there is an indirectness about it, which is important, I think, for the reading of Job. So I hope that detour is just worth doing in terms of thinking about agency and who does what. But let's press on in Job 19. Job pleads for pity from his friends, verses 21 and 22. And he's struggling with this monster God, this cosmic sadist. And then verse 23 to 29, one of the most wonderful little parts of Job's speeches, deservedly famous. Verse 23, there's a lovely irony here. "Oh," says Job, "I wish that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll." And we want to say to Job, actually, they were. But why does he want them recorded on a scroll? Well, in fact, verse 24, he wants them inscribed more permanently, with an iron tool on lead or engraved in rock. Why does he want them recorded like that? Why is he so concerned for them to be recorded? Well, he's about to die, that's what he reckons. He's almost dead. And if his friends, so-called, write his epitaph and put it on his tombstone, Job knows perfectly well what they will write. It'll say something like, "Here lies Job, who pretended he was godly but was actually a sinner, who wouldn't repent, and that's why he's dead. May he not rest in peace." That's what they will write. No prizes for guessing that. So the reason he wants his words recorded is he wants his words recorded so that his testimony to his own blamelessness, the fact that he doesn't deserve what's happened to him, should be recorded. And as he longs for that, suddenly we have this wonderful, wonderful expression of confidence in verse 25. "I know that my Redeemer lives," my kinsman Redeemer, the one, as it were, my family member, who's going to make sure that justice is done. I know that there is one who is going to make sure that justice is done. And there's some slight translation questions here, but the general sense is clear. I know that in the end he's going to stand, maybe he's going to stand on or by my grave, but he's going to stand. "And after my skin's been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God." That's what he's been longing for all through the book. "I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart," literally my kidneys, the place of my emotion, "yearns within me." And Job is overwhelmed momentarily with a confidence that there is one in heaven who will stand for him, and ultimately who will say of him, "This one is mine. This man belongs to me. This man is in right relationship with me." And because he's confident of that, he warns his friends in the last two verses to take care, that they themselves are in danger. Verse 20, "You should fear the sword yourselves. You'll know that there is a judgment. There is a judge, there is a Redeemer." Now, in preaching this, of course, it's not difficult to draw lines to Jesus Christ. Who is the Redeemer? Well, the Redeemer is God himself. But it was wonderful that when Handel, I don't know whether this Handel's Messiah gets played or sung in Malaysia, this may be a cross-cultural comment, but is Handel's Messiah sufficiently well known in Asia? Handel's Messiah, when the lyrics were put together, it was just so utterly brilliant to put "I know that my Redeemer lives" alongside "For now is Christ risen from the dead." So if we ask the question, how do we know that Job isn't just engaged in wishful thinking? How do we know that Job isn't just saying, "I hope it'll work out right"? Answer, we know because 2,000 years ago there was a blameless believer who was done to death on a cross, and who, as he died, committed his spirit to the one who judges justly, and trusted himself to the one who judges justly, trusting that there was for him a Redeemer who would stand for him. And we know that it wasn't wishful thinking because on that first Easter morning he was raised bodily from the dead. And that was the proof. That is the absolute proof, the concrete bodily proof, that the hope that Job had was not wishful thinking, and it was genuine. And it's a wonderful way to preach Christ from Job chapter 19. And so what we've got in Job chapter 19 is Job wrestling with how the universe is run and struggling with the fact that the sovereign God gives permission to the hand of the malicious, monstrous Satan to reach out Satan's hands and target him in that horrible way. And yet, in his heart of hearts, Job cannot believe that that's the end of the story. He cannot believe that the monstrous God who seems to be who is attacking him is the end of the story. And ultimately, he holds on in faith to the belief that there is a God who is sovereign even over that monster, as it were, and who is the one who will ultimately stand for him and redeem and rescue him. Now, we mustn't be unrealistic about this, because Job, it's not as though having reached this great pinnacle of faith, Job then stays cheerful, because he descends into laments every bit as dark as the ones before, afterwards. But that's just so right, isn't it? That's so right to Christian experience, that's how Christian experience works when we're suffering. But nonetheless, we must be unafraid to preach the wonder of that triumphant moment of faith that Job has, of light in the darkness. As I say, I'm going to have a go at preaching that this evening. I think I'm going to stop there. I was hoping we'd get to this stage where we've really covered Job 1 to 27, sort of, to the end of the Comforters and the end of Job's main speeches. So we'll give ourselves a bit of time for questions, if you'd like that. Some may need to slip away. One or two people have said to me they need to slip away. That's fine, of course. I'm hoping tomorrow we'll tackle chapter 28, very important chapter, and then Job's final speeches, and then Elihu, and then the Lord's speeches. And I'm really hoping that by lunchtime tomorrow we will get to the end. It'll be quite sad if we don't. If we just get to chapter 37, I think you would feel shortchanged. But let's give ourselves a little bit of time for questions now. Any questions? It's been a long, hard morning, but I'm very happy to take questions. If you'd like that. Yes.
So you mentioned that Job's way of looking at it is perhaps justification by grace through faith. And yet, if we read 19 verse 6, he seems to be very much like his prosperity friends. God has wronged me because I've done right, and that's why he's drawn his net around me. He seems to have that cause and effect kind of thing as well. I've done that, therefore God's punishing me.
Yes.
And, sorry.
Go on.
Which leads to the next question as well. If Job were righteous, blameless, how does that square with Paul's assessment of humanity in Romans 1 to 3, where everyone is turned away against God, there's no one righteous, no even one?
Thank you. That's a very, very helpful question. And it raises the question of what the word righteous means, for example, in the Psalms, from which Paul is quoting in Romans 3. And there are two ways of looking at this. We tend to assume that when in the Psalms the word righteous is used, it means simple goodness, and that when Job claims to be blameless, he's claiming, as you're suggesting, to be good, to put it simply. But I think it's probably true to say, well, I'm pretty convinced it's true to say that when Job claims to be blameless, he's claiming to be penitent. He's claiming that he's repented of his sins, but God doesn't seem to want to forgive him. So, for example, let me see if I can find one. I'm not sure that I can find this. One of the laments we were looking at earlier had this, I think. I'm not sure that I can find it. Something we read earlier today, there was a point where Job said something like, why doesn't he forgive my sin? I'm sorry that I can't find it on the spur of the moment. But just to go back to tie this in with Romans, when Paul says in Romans 3, there's none righteous, none who does good, he's quoting from Psalm 14 and Psalm 5 and various other psalms. And one of the things that I will get the Cornhill students to do is to look at those psalms, actually the original of the psalms in their context. And in the psalms, it's quite clear that when the psalmist says there's no one who does right, no one who does good, he doesn't mean all human beings without exception. Because it's quite clear that in those psalms, the psalmist himself doesn't include himself, and there are others in the psalms who turn to God for their refuge. God is their refuge. And so when the psalmists say there's no one who does good, they mean out there, outside of the true people of God, there's no one who does good. But there are people who are righteous, in right relationship with God, for whom God is their refuge. Not because they're sinless, but because they're penitent, they're believers. So when Paul quotes from Romans 3 saying there's no one, no one, no one, what he means is there's no one except for those who show the obedience of faith. Romans 1 verse 5. So his manifesto in Romans 1, 16 and 17 is that the righteousness of God is given to faith. And everything that follows is establishing that manifesto. So when he quotes those Old Testament texts, he means by them precisely what the psalmists meant, which is that outside of faith, there's no one who does good. But as in the Psalms, those who make God their refuge, those who seek him, come under his wings for refuge and so on, all the ways the Psalms talk about faith, are righteous by faith. So when the Psalms use the word righteous, they mean righteousness by faith, because that's the only way anyone's ever been righteous. And I take it that Job is the same. That when Job is saying, I don't deserve this, he's saying, I'm a believer. I've repented, I repent, I believe, I trust him. And he's behaving as though I hadn't been forgiven, but I should have been forgiven. So he's not a self-righteous, legalistic prig, a stuck-up prig who's saying, look at me, I'm so good. He's saying, I'm a real believer, and I don't believe real believers ought to be destroyed like this. Do you see the point there? That's quite a big, there's a lot of theology in that, in Romans. But the point in Romans 3 is very important, that when Paul says there's no one who does good, he cannot mean no human being without exception. Because if he did mean that, he's abusing the Psalms. He's quoting them out of context. Do come back on me at that later if you'd like to. Other questions? I'm looking to Andrew to see whether we can call that a day.
My brother here has just found that 7:21 might be the verse we're looking for.
7:21 is exactly the verse I was looking for. You must have a gift of knowledge, my brother. Thank you. 7:21. Why do you not pardon my offences and forgive my sins? Thank you. So Job is not claiming to be sinless. But he is saying, why am I not being pardoned? Why am I not forgiven? I think that's really important in reading Job, that he is a penitent believer, rather, and it fits, doesn't it? Because the comforters are treating him like a self-righteous, stuck-up prig, and they're saying, you think you're so good and so pious, but we know you're not. But actually he's not claiming to be that. He's claiming to be a believer. Thank you. Which brother was it? I owe a debt of gratitude to you. Thank you. Perhaps you'd like to teach tomorrow. How about if I pray and we call that a day? Let's have a moment of quiet and then I'll pray. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth, and in my flesh I will see God with my own eyes. How my heart yearns within me. Lord, we thank you for that wonderful glimpse of light and faith and hope in Job in the midst of his sufferings. We praise you for the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ, by which we know that that hope was not in vain and will not disappoint us. And we ask that as we seek to understand and to teach and to bring others through this great book of Job, we might do so with a real, substantial Christian hope and confidence. For Jesus' sake.